Hello, it's July 10th, 2023, 6:30 p.m., and we are calling to order the Planning and Development Council of the town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, as I understand it, we have regrets from Councillor Duddick and Councillor Giddings. Otherwise, we're all in our places. Now I'd like to ask members of council if there are any declarations of pecuniary interest. And Madam Clerk, I am not seeing any. I recommend that we move into committee of the whole. A mover and seconder would be needed for that. Councillor Longo and Councillor Lischina, thank you. Any objection? There being none, we are resolved into committee of the whole. Now, council, we have some consent items, including a confidential consent item. Are there any separations from these? Councillor Knoll.
I would just like to move the confidential consent item.
Thank you. Will you move the others as well?
Sure, absolutely.
All right. We have a motion and no separations for all of the consent items. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there being none, the consent items are adopted. And that brings us to our public hearing item. And if there's anyone watching the live stream of the meeting on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095 and we'll connect you to the meeting. You'll be called upon to speak following any registered delegations. And for this public hearing item, the public meeting report for an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for Enterox on, I guess the company is called Enterox Dundas 3015 Inc. And that refers to property at 3005 and 3015 Dundas Street West. And just to set the stage, this is what we call a public meeting report. This is not a decision meeting for this item. This is a meeting we conduct to identify issues to be added to the issues list that staff have already identified with the application. And those are listed in the meeting report that we're working from tonight. So we'll be looking for members of the public to name issues to add to the list if any have been omitted, and the same thing with council. And to kick that off, we have a presentation from agents for the applicant, and as I understand it, this presentation is going to be led by Dana Anderson and Catherine Roscher from MHBC, a noted planning firm. Ms. Anderson, Ms. Roscher, please begin. Did I misspeak when I said we might hear from Ms. Anderson?
Yes, Ms. Anderson, unfortunately, she has COVID, so she is recovering and she will not be here tonight. She sends her regrets.
We're grateful for her consideration.
Good evening. I'm Mohammed Al-Thari.
If you want us to hear you, you're going to have to somehow speak into the microphone.
My name is Mohammed Al-Thari. I'm a principal at WZMH Architects, the designer of the project.
Okay.
I wonder if we can do anything about your mic amount.
We'll swap it back and forth. Okay, so good evening, everyone. As noted, my name is Catherine Roscher. I'm a planner with MHBC Planning. With me today is Mohammed, principal at WZMH, and together we'll walk you through the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 3005 and 3015 Dundas Street West. So the site is a fairly rectangular parcel located at the northeast corner of Dundas Street West and Bronte Road in Palermo Village. The area has been envisioned as a node for employment and residential development, and it's intended to develop into a high-density, transit-supportive mixed-use area. The site has an area of approximately 0.77 hectares and is currently vacant. Surrounding the site are vacant lands and low-density residential uses to the north and west. South of the site is comprised of single detached townhouse and mid-rise buildings, and east of the property are low-density residential buildings and Palermo United Church. The image on the right outlines the proposed public parks, urban squares, and vision for the area, with our site being superimposed on top, and shows the connections to the community at large.
So I'm just going to go over a brief description of the building composition. The overall composition is it's basically a tower over podium. The site faces three streets, Bronte, Old Bronte, and Dundas on the south side. two towers on the site. Building A is 27 floors. Building B is 30 floors, sitting on a 3-story podium. The idea here is to shrink the amount of building footprint and open it up for public open space as much as possible, and maximizing the green space also as much as possible. We introduced only one entry point to the site, one curb cut, and we kept all the vehicular circulation within the property line in the middle, away from the public realm. So we have access on the north side, vehicular access to a drop-off and to parking and loading as well. In the southeast corner, we have a publicly open, accessible space. It's also links as a mid-block connection all the way to the north side of the property. The public open space is also framed by retail at the ground floor. We have 2 retail stores on the north building and the south building. And then on the street side, we have main entry points for the tower, and we have secondary entry points in the drop-off area. As you can see on the podium, we have outdoor amenities and green roofs that extends over the podium area overall. Pass it over to you.
So the in-effect policy for the subject land is shown here. The region of Halton's official plan designates the site as within the Palermo Village primary regional node and within a regional intensification corridor in the urban boundary. The 1984 Oakville official plan, OPA 198, is the current in-effect policy on the subject lands, designating the site as a special study area. Within the livable Oakville plan, the property is designated within the nodes and corridors for further study, the proposed regional transit node, and along the regional transit priority corridor. Nodes and corridors are key areas in the town identified to focus mixed-use development and intensification. Town Council on April 2021 adopted OPA 34, with the region later approving it on March 2023, and the subject lands are included in the Palermo Village growth area and proposed to be designated as urban core. However, this plan has since been appealed and is currently not in force and effect. The proposed OPA seeks to amend the North Oakville West Secondary Plan through an amendment to Livable Oakville to permit a high-density mixed-use development. A site-specific policy is proposed to redesignate the lands with specific height and density provisions to facilitate the development Mohammed's described. The property is currently zoned as future development. Future development zones require rezoning applications in order to implement development that is consistent with the official plan. In order for the proposed development, as discussed, the amendments to the townwide zoning bylaw 2009-189 is required to rezone the subject lands from future development to a high-density residential zone. A series of site-specific amendments will also be required to implement the design of the building. Site-specific provisions apply to the height, maximum floor space index, tower floor plate sizes, and a reduction of the provided parking rate. Throughout this process, we've had a number of opportunities for engagement. We're committed to working with staff on the technical elements of the application and the design, understanding the important location and context of this site. So in early 2022, we had meetings with town staff to refine the design of the building prior to our pre-consultation meeting, which was held in July of 2022. And following our pre-consultation meeting, we had meetings with urban design staff, and we were able to refine our design further and implement some of the suggestions provided along the way. In March and April of this year, we held meetings with the local councilors as well as our public information meeting. And during these meetings, we shared presentations providing information on the different aspects of the proposal, similar to the presentation you're seeing tonight. Our application was submitted to the town on June 6th and deemed complete on June 8th. And we're currently awaiting comments from the town and the region, and we're committed to working through these comments and input received today, and we will revise our plans appropriately. Another aspect of engagement that we have been undertaking is ongoing discussions with our adjacent landowner. We've been holding these ongoing discussions related to cost sharing, shared services, and a potential purchase of a sliver of land adjacent to our site, and we hope that these discussions maintain or continue through our ongoing application process. Mohammed?
So this is an eye-level rendering at the corner of Old Bronte and Dundas Street, just showing the open public space we have with retail on both ends of the building. The ground floor is basically has a retail component plus residential amenities, so it's animated across all corners of the site. We kept the podium at a very pedestrian scale level at 3 stories with a green roof on top, and we introduced warm materials such as wood finishes that would wrap around the podium levels and creating that continuity with the public realm. The last slide would be an overall view of the building, again taken from the corner of Old Bronte and Dundas Street, showing the 2 towers. The one on the left is 30 floors, the one on the right is 27, and the public open space right in the middle of the building. That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Councillor Elgar and Councillor Shi have questions. Councillor Elgar?
Thank you, through you, Member Burton. Thanks for coming this evening. When I look at the application, I'm just trying to understand, well, there's a few things, but parking is number 1. So it sounds like the number of units, you don't have 1 parking space per unit at all. It's 0.8, is that correct? Is what you're applying for?
We have 4 levels below grade for parking. We have 690 units, and we're showing 690 parking spaces for residential, including visitors. So the ratio would be 20% for visitor parking and 80% for residents. So if you combine the two, it's roughly 1 parking space per unit.
So the retail people, where are they supposed to park when they come to visit?
The retail people, we have also 8 parking designated spots for retail that will also happen on below grade parking in P1.
So it's not part of the numbers here at all?
No, it's the total is 698, 690 for residential and 8 for retail.
Okay, sorry, and the number of dwelling units then in each of these places? The 27-story and the 30-story, they each have how many units?
How many units?
How many,
how many units?
condos or apartments?
So the Tower A has 308, Tower B has 382, so combined is 690, and then retail is on the ground floor, 2 units of retail.
And visitors, you got 0.2 for visitors, if people happen to come to visit. So no one, I guess, what you're figuring is no one will have an ability, I guess, to get 2 spaces. They have 2 vehicles, their personal vehicle and a work vehicle?
So it's next to public transit. So some of the purchasers might not want a parking space. So for example, 1 bedroom and studio may not like to buy a parking space. Some units will have to, but the designation is roughly 1 per unit.
So when you say high density, what is your vision? What is high density to you for people and jobs per hectare?
So high density is basically, so we have, and our density here is roughly 6.1 FAR, floor area ratio for the site.
Okay, so, okay, the FSI, 6.1?
6.1, yes.
Okay, because is it in the report?
I believe so. It's in the drawings for sure, and it's in the report as well. And we're measuring the 6.1 based on the development area, so we're accounting for road widening and setbacks.
Okay. Okay, that's what I have right now. That's my questions. I thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. Councillor Shi. And then we have quite a list. Councillor Shi.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the presentation. I have 2 questions. So first one, I noticed that there is an main entrance on Dundas Street, right? So I just want to know how far from this entrance to the Bronte Road, because this is a, did you do some traffic, there's an impact for those which will, the car will be turned right on the Bronte Road?
So the main entrance on Dundas Street is a pedestrian entrance. It's not a vehicular entrance.
Okay.
If that's what you're saying, yeah. It's only 1 vehicular entrance at the north side of the property on Old Bronte.
Okay, thank you. The second question is, So from my understanding, so the retail space is 1,008 meter square meter. Is that correct? The retail space.
The retail, we have 2 units. One is approximately 300 square meters. The other one is approximately 270.
So, and just now you say there's only 8 parking for the retail guests. Is that right?
Yes, 8 parking, yeah, for the retail only.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shi. Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Worship. Councillor Shi has addressed my first question, but I just want to probe a little bit deeper. So there's 2 units. Is there any chance of those being subdivided further or strictly 2 retail units? Is there any consideration of putting demising walls up and creating additional units?
I believe it depends on, again, market demand. So if a store wants a smaller unit, it might be demised into smaller units. But right now, we're sizing it as one proper 1 unit each. Yeah.
Okay.
1 per podium.
And there's a total of 8 units available to retail users. The visitor spots, if there are visitor spots in the lower garages, would not be available to visitors to the retail spaces?
I think so. So let's say it depends on the traffic report and peak hours. So some of the visitor parking might be shared, but we found in the report that 8 is enough for the retail at this point. It will mainly be service retail, maybe for the residents and for the adjacent buildings.
Okay. Switching hats for a second to the historical implications of this particular site. No doubt you're aware of the significance of this site from a historical perspective. It was the first piece of land settled in the Palermo Township. It was settled by, Palermo Village. It was settled by a settler by the name of Hagar, who was the founder of Palermo. It's a significant piece of property. Have you considered how you might recognize or somehow enshrine the history of the significance of this lot on your project, in your project?
So if I may answer this, we have in the public square in the corner, the one we're showing at the corner of Old Bronte and Dundas, we will put signage and a plaque for that to show the history, the recognition of the Hager House and the Palermo Hotel. So there will be an indication of that, of the history of the site, basically.
Just a plaque?
In the park area, yes. It will have a certain presence in the park area. It will be designed. It will have significance presence in the corner of the site.
Has there been any consideration to maybe upping that a little bit, plussing it, as we say, to recognize the significance of this property?
I think
because it's sort of, when you think about it in the context of the history of Trafalgar Township and ultimately the history of Oakville, it's a pretty darn important piece of property, and it sort of, I think it deserves more than a plaque. I would certainly like you to go back and consider if there's any ways you could consider doing something a little more significant than just a plaque that's ultimately going to be forgotten.
Definitely, yes.
Shortly after it's installed, frankly. I mean, that's what happens to plaques. Some sort of interpretive thing, naming something that really jumps out and says this was Palermo, this was a real village, this was a significant contributor to the history of Upper Canada.
I think so, and that will even enrich the site that we have for sure.
Okay. Yep. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you very much, guys, for coming. Questions, again, it's very hard for me to read the site statistics in our plan and to read what these things are. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding the commercial amount of space on this site. So we've got 2 residential towers, from what I can see, and then 3-story buildings. So how much in total commercial space is there in the plan right now?
Do you have the total? Yeah.
It's 14,852 square feet.
Okay. It's behooving me on what plan I saw, because we've had iterations of Palermo a number of times come before us, but there was a time when I thought that we had discussed about making this a Main Street corridor and making restaurants and flex streets and making this an area As it says in our OPA 34, focus on community uses and commercial activities to support the communities in the northwest part of town. So I see more of just sort of park space here now for the residents in the two towers. What I don't see is the commercial focus for the northwest part of Oakville here. So I'm wondering, did that drop off, or was that factored in your discussions with the adjacent landowner, where and when that conversation sort of moved away from a Main Street commercial area for everyone in the northwest part of Oakville to just to supply some public realm space for the people in the two towers?
So the property is, it's noted as a node and corridor, so it is part of that area, and it is expected to have commercial uses. We have been talking with the adjacent landowners to the north, and there are discussions about ongoing commercial proposals. There is the sliver of land to the west of our site that we are in discussions with the north landowners about. We have discussed additional commercial, but at the time right now, we think that this might be an appropriate amount of commercial for the building, knowing that there is still the balance of Palermo Village, and there is still quite a lot of Palermo that does still need to develop and expand.
And you're aware of what's being planned on the west side of Bronte Road then, and the spaces, and actually the lack of commercial over there for more public use areas over there?
My understanding is the west side of Bronte is to have a transit station.
A number of things, transit station, a library, a number of things, but it's, the focus over there was more sort of infrastructure, community space infrastructure, and I guess my understanding, what the residents' understanding of the number of years is that the east portion, yours, in the middle of allowing towers, there would be a main street corridor feel with commercials and restaurants and retail and service and these sorts of things. And I guess, do you feel that this concept plan has captured that, or have you moved away from that?
We've moved away from it a little bit, but that's definitely something we can go and take a second look at.
Yeah, it might take a little more than a second look, but I appreciate that. And then just secondly, and I have been at our staff on this for a number of years, and I'll just come straight forward to you guys and say it. What are the plans for pedestrian crossings at the intersection of Bronte and Dundas? And are you engaged in how we transport people safely, either elevated above or below? Or have you had those conversations with our staff? I don't see anything in here about that intersection, which is a 6-lane intersection, east and west. How do you propose anybody make their way over to your area to patronize your commercial areas?
So there are sidewalks and a wider boulevard that is provided across both Dundas and Old Bronte. We would expect them to be using those sidewalks as well as the crosswalk that is available at Dundas and Bronte. We haven't had fulsome discussions with staff, and we're hoping through the comments that are provided, we can further those discussions with transportation staff and with planning.
So did you receive those comments in the pre-consultation process about making another avenue to cross Dundas Road, just rather than just using the sidewalk? Did you receive any comments from staff about that in pre-consult?
I don't believe we did. I can double check our comments, and if we had, we can provide something in our second submission, but I don't think we had anything related to a second crossing of Dundas Street.
Okay, thank you very much.
Alrighty, Councillor Nanda.
Thank you, Your Worship. Hi, how are you? Thank you so much for the presentation. I know we had some earlier conversations as well, which I appreciate. And just wanted to follow up on some of those discussions again in terms of how you're working in conjunction with the other developer as well, and how we had kind of spoke about complete communities and ensuring that the infrastructure was in place when we're going to be putting so many people in such a small space, so including like community centers, schools. And I think we had discussed before, had you reached out to the board or the other developer to see that there would be ample space to have schools for this much infrastructure and development that's happening?
So we have had ongoing discussions with the adjacent landowner to the north. I am not certain that we've discussed school boards, but that is something, because it is such a large parcel to the north and we are bringing so many people to this neighborhood, that is definitely something that we can incorporate into our next discussion with them.
And including community centers and other facilities. I know we've had discussions there as well, and we just want to ensure that if we're putting that much density in, that at the same time we're bringing the other development in as well, because we know it's quick to develop these houses and these units, and I know we need to quickly develop, but if we need the communities to be whole, otherwise with transit and with everything, you know, people won't be able to, it won't be easy to live there without having all the infrastructure in place as well. So if we can just follow up on that as well again.
For sure, that's
Thank
definitely
you.
something we can have a discussion about.
Thank you, Councillor Nanda. I believe Councillor Hazlet-Thiel is next. Councillor O'Meara, your hand is up.
Could I just ask you to, through you, Mayor Burton, could I just ask you to pull up the image, your architectural image that shows the two buildings and the space? So one of my questions is just, and it's further to Councillor O'Meara's comment, in terms of crossing this area, was there any consideration on what would happen if a pedestrian crossover, I don't mean a street level crossover, but a flyover type crossover, was there any consideration of that in the design?
So we do have a large setback from the building B to the property line, about 13 meters. So there's ample of space to allow for any additional structure in that area. And what we understand is that there might be road widening in the future. So that's also taken into account future widening of Dundas Street.
So there has been some thought to it, it could be a possibility. Okay, thank you for that consideration. When you mentioned that the FAR, or the FSI as we call it, is 6.1, could you also just help me understand what is the amount of green space, how you calculate green space on this piece of land?
So roughly the built area is 40% of the site area. That's approximate number right now. Then the remainder would be a driveway that would be roughly 1/3 of the landscape area or less. We try to keep it to as minimum as possible.
Okay, so thank you. And in terms of mix of units and all of that, have you put any consideration into that?
Yes, we do have a mix of 1 bedroom, 1 plus den, 2 bedroom, 2 plus den, and a 3 bedroom. We have a range of mix. I believe the unit count and the percentage was shared in the report as well.
So if you would be so kind enough to direct me to the number, because I didn't see the number of 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms. Sorry, we had a fairly high volume of reading. I might have missed it.
I think it was in the architectural package and our planning staff report, our planning justification report, sorry, not the staff report.
We don't have it.
So we don't have that.
No, not at your fingertips easily.
Okay. And you don't know it off the top of your head?
I can do a quick calculation here. So approximately.
It's okay if you didn't, we can get it after. I think it's important as we talk about what you're building, the mix of units is important.
So high level, half 1 bedroom, half 2 bedroom, and plus, the high level,
All right, so we're making progress. 2 or 3 years ago, that number wouldn't have been talked about. My other question, it's been covered on commercial use. I appreciate Councillor Knoll raising the historical, because I wondered how that was going to be incorporated. And my only other question is, you mentioned the sliver of land and something to do with commercial, but when you look at the building, and I think there's another drawing, you have a lot of very tall buildings around it. Have you had a conversation about a block plan and how the sliver would relate to a block plan for the area?
We're in discussions right now with the landowner to the north on how to best address the sliver of land.
Right.
So that discussion is still ongoing, and whether it becomes a portion of our site and becomes landscaped, incorporated into our building, or if it maintains in their ownership and they take some development on that land as well. So that's an ongoing discussion right now.
Okay, so I guess my question is for staff. Is there a block plan or secondary plan that we would see when it came back?
Through you, Mayor.
It depends if a block plan is created by the applicant. We would certainly recommend that they do that. It is an excellent way of planning for an area up here.
Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. And by the way, some of those architectural features are quite lovely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams, what issues would you like to identify?
There we go, my system is now working. Thank you very much. Just going back to the original question that was happening just a moment ago, if you look on page 30 of the planning justification report, it has the breakdown of the number of bedrooms per unit of the total 690, it looks like. For example, 18.8% is one bedroom and so on. So I have a couple of questions for you with respect to the chosen heights, the chosen number of units, and chosen densities that you've got in the design. What made you decide to create the heights that you've chosen and the densities that you've chosen? It looks to me like the density in terms of units per hectare is 885 units per hectare, which is a significant number, especially for this area. What made you choose that? Why are you bringing that forward?
So we had a number of design proposals. Some of them are mid-rise that would extend and cover most of the site area. Other proposals look at taller buildings, slimmer towers that go much taller and have more open space on the site. So in terms of area, if you compare the two with the built form, we found that the high-rise built form will be more appropriate than mid-rise, talking about the same density. But to answer your question for density, basically we're going with what's going on in the area in terms of densification, bringing transit and bringing more density to that area.
And so with regards to this location versus other locations around town, was there any analysis done with respect to the kinds of densities that are expected at our other urban center areas, for example, the Midtown area, the Bronte GO Station area, and those kinds of things? Where's the analysis there?
I think you can maybe talk in terms of policies, and it's very similar to the corner of, I forgot which street, it's Dundas and Trafalgar. It's very similar in terms of density. But in terms of policy, maybe if you can explain more.
So in terms of policy, the site is within a node for intensification. It's in a regional transit corridor. It's a place where we expect densities and we expect intensification to be. It's at the corner. It will be across the street from a transit hub. There'll be the 407 transit way just further north on Bronte. It's going to be a site that is going to be developed, and we think that the density that we provided is an appropriate amount of density based on the infrastructure that is intended to be provided at the site.
So you looked at, for example, the Trafalgar Dundas buildings that are either built or being planned to be built, and considered those densities and those heights as a comparative?
Correct. I think they can be, taller than what's happening right now on that intersection. But in terms of density and site area, it is very comparable. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sure that staff have already captured that particular issue or question, but thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McNeice.
Through your worship, thank you for the presentation. Just have a few questions on the list that haven't been covered yet. So I'm assuming your public courtyard space is a POPS, a privately owned public space, so managed by the condo corporation, essentially?
Correct.
Okay. I'll just second some of the comments on heritage and pedestrian access. We've got our 2012 urban design report for that area that looks at pedestrian flyovers, things like that. It's a really challenging road to cross, and it's probably only getting busier, so I'd certainly support anything that improves pedestrian access. And I'll also highlight that in the southwest area, we call it Bronte Creek of Dundas and Bronte, is an area that lacks commercial retail. So, if you want to see the busiest Starbucks ever, it's kind of just across from them. All the kids go there and stuff. So they're yearning for retail and, the small scale, medium-sized retail. I think there's actually quite a large market for that. They're waiting for the Argo development across the street, but it sounds like you'll have potentially shovels in the ground sooner. So I'd agree with some others that I think there's real demand for active, vibrant retail in that area. So anything you can do to support that would be great. And then I sort of frequent this area. I'm at the daycare across the street quite a bit, and I'll say access is very challenging. So if you put up your concept plan there for a second, I can just highlight a few challenges of that corner. I don't know who puts it up, but oh, it's IT. So anyways, as it comes up, so it sounds like your main access is off of Old Bronte Road. So your main access is off of Old Bronte Road, so all the essentially cars will be there. So if you're coming down Old Bronte Road, you can only go west on Dundas. There's an island that prevents you. I mean, obviously there's so much traffic you can't turn east, so you can only turn right there. Now, if you want to go south on Bronte Road, you've got about 4 lanes of traffic you need to cross. Within less than a block, within 100 meters, it's impossible to do. So people coming down there, they're going to be really restricted. And so what happens is people go north to William Halton Parkway, and if you want to go west, there's an island there again. You can't, and they all go and do a U-turn around there. So there's real access issues that, and I don't know if it's on staff or the applicant, but there's the way you have it planned here, as it's laid out now, it would be near impossible to access efficiently without doing illegal turns and creating a lot of safety concerns. The other thing I'll add, and this is kind of, well, one thing on your public engagement, I mean, it looked like about 3 people attended. Is that accurate?
3 or 4, I think, yeah.
Okay, oh, sorry, maybe 4. I'll give you the benefit of 4. I mean, I don't believe you have to do more public engagement, but I think it might be valuable to hear from some other residents. I think the ones in the Bronte Creek area, just not even a block away, don't even know this is going on. Maybe in the Mint building as well, just to the south, but it might be to your benefit to customize your commercial a little bit more if you hear from some of those residents or find a way to engage them, because I don't think they know at all about this. And then just lastly, more to staff, but just asking if there's any inclusionary zoning tools we could use on this development, and if we think this might be a future MTSA area, master transit supported area, and if so, if it could be a protected MTSA, which would allow us to use the inclusionary zoning tools. Not sure if you have the answer now, but I think this is the report where we list out the concern, or this is the meeting for the concern. So I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We have a revival of interest from Councillor Knoll, and I believe possibly from another councillor.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, thanks for the chance to speak again. Following up on a really good point that Councillor O'Meara raised in terms of the expectations around retail in that area. Have you done a retail analysis of the potential for this site in terms of ancillary retail in the building? And the reason I ask this is because it's something based on something you said a moment ago. You said that it's likely this is going to be and maybe if I'm wrong, then you feel free to correct me. This is largely going to be retail to support the buildings. Is that what your expectation is? Because it's 6,000. I don't speak square meters. I'm in the retail business, so I understand square feet more. This is 6,113 roughly square feet of space. If you look at an average Tim Hortons or an average Starbucks, they're between 1,500 and 2,000 square feet each. So this is not an insubstantial amount of space. So the question is, have you done a retail analysis to determine the potential for this space and what the necessary parking spaces would be in order to support that space? So I'll ask that question, and then I have a follow-up.
So related to the parking study was done on the property, or for the proposal, and it based its visitor ratio on the amount of commercial space that we were providing. It looked at other sites, and it used other proxy sites to determine that the amount that we were providing we thought was going to be appropriate, again, based on its location, based on the proposed transit that's to be in the area, and the proposed community that it's going to be built around. We would assume a lot of people would be walking to places like this because of the intensity and the development in the community.
So the answer to the question is you haven't done actual retail analysis of the property?
Not a retail analysis, no.
So this traffic analysis was done based strictly on the residential building with some thought given to the commercial as well? Or was it specifically tailored to commercial use?
Both.
It was tailored to commercial use.
It has a component that is tailored to the commercial and has a component that is tailored to the residential, including the visitor ratio.
Okay, and what were the inputs on the commercial, I guess, considerations? What did you feed into the consultant to say the type of space, the type of tenants that you'd have in the space?
I believe it was a convenience retail type use.
Okay, so 6,000 square feet of convenience retail. Okay, so I would like to have added to the list, Your Worship and staff, something about, something along the lines of doing a deeper dive on the retail on this particular site and the appropriateness of the parking to support that retail. And just a little bit of justification for why I'm saying this. I represent Ward 5, and we have several condo buildings with retail at grade. And almost every one of those units, they are either, and no offense to nail salon operators or barber shops, but that's largely what we have. Beauty salons, nail salons, and dentists. That's it. The retailers can't survive. And the retailers that have tried to move in there have all generally failed because their customers can't get to them. So if you take your 4 spaces, if you take your 6,000 square feet and say it turns into 4 spaces, if you have 2 employees per space, you're not going to have any places for your customers to go, for example. And I know that was a big issue on our live-work properties that we were so keen on a couple decades ago. So I would really like to see a little deeper dive on the retail piece of this to really make it successful. I think the potential is huge, and I think it's being missed, not just for the perspective of the developer, but for the community.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elgar?
Mayor Burton, my question is just directly to staff based on the Bill 109 application where staff, and when do they have adequate time to even report back before October 7th on this? Because this is the new rules basically, and we're having a meeting July the 10th, and the date eligible for an appeal or refund for non-decision is October 7th. And if you look at how many work days there are in this 90-day period, you know, you're down to 2 months of actually working.
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Thank you for the question. That's a good question. So we're going to work hand in hand with the applicant here to make sure that we are going to meet that recommendation report deadline. So it's going to have to be turned around quickly from the applicant to address all the comments we've heard today and comments from the public, and we will make that deadline.
So if the comments don't come back from the applicant, does it matter? Does the date still become October 7? Boom, that's it? That
We will
have
be,
to do it?
through you, Mayor, we will be bringing a report forward in October.
Even if information that we want is missing?
That is correct.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. It's to staff. Do we have a projected population for this growth node in its totality? And the question comes to mind based on the excellent questions that Councillor Knoll asked.
Through you, Mayor, I do not have that number, but it's going on my list, and we'll bring that back to you.
Okay. And my other question is for yourselves. In terms of an ability to get the information that has been requested, and do you feel you have the time to do your project fair service and get us the information we need by October?
I think, I know we are coming into summer and vacation season, but I do think that there is enough time to turn something around quickly.
Okay. Well, we look forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I thank the fine folks from MHBC for the way you met all the questions and your promise of cooperation and speedy work. That's very, very kind and generous of you. I will now thank you for your time, and we're going to call our registered delegations and anyone who has phoned in.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Lischina.
My apologies, Your Worship. Just before they leave, is there any issues with a wind tunnel effect between those 2 buildings?
I think they're coming back to answer your question.
So I believe based on the requirements for site plan application, there will be a wind tunnel study provided for pedestrian comfort, basically. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor Lischina, for your question. Madam Clerk, as I understand it, we have a registered delegation. Would you please invite the registered delegation?
The registered delegation is Renee Carlson.
Welcome, Ms. Carlson. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Your Worship and councillors. My name is Renee Carlson, a longtime resident of Oakville. I'm speaking on behalf of the owners of 7 future development lot owners located on Old Bronte Road and north of William Holton, also located within the same North Palermo Village. I would like to speak in support of proposed development at 3015 Dundas Street West. This is the only cluster of vacant land remaining in Oakville. The best choice to build brand new, develop beautiful architectural designs, as well as novel urban design. Novel in Oakville, long utilized in Europe. The location is blank slate, tabula rasa, blessed with natural beauty. Glenorchy Conservation Area to the east, clear view of Niagara Escarpment to northwest, Bronte Provincial Park to the southwest. It is major transit intersection with higher order transit. Highway 407 with approved bus lane and transit station, planned community center, and rapid transit, alongside Dundas with station at the corner of Dundas and Bronte, and proximity of Bronte GO station. All support placing high-density residential towers in the spot. And that's all. Thank you. Just on record, I speak on behalf of the owners of 3121, 3131, 3141, 3153, 3185, 3195, and 3221, Old Bronte Road, which is also called Farther North Regional Road 25. Thank you.
Ms. Carlson, thank you for your information. Madam Clerk, were there any call-ins to the number?
We haven't received any yet.
All right. Then let's turn to the planners and ask if they've added any new issues to their issues list.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. The other matters and concerns and issues that are going to be addressed include parking considerations, both residential and commercial uses, and those parking enhancements tied together. Pedestrian connections to the south of Highway 5 or Dundas Street, and specifically second safe connections or elevated connections, schools and community uses in the infrastructure piece to the west of Regional Road 25. The mix of units, so a breakdown of the mix of units, the block plan potential for these lands in the surrounding area, density considerations, municipal access points onto the site, traffic considerations, resident feedback from the immediate area, inclusionary zoning tools for this area in the future, retail analysis and commercial uses, and that parking being tied together, the projected population for this urban core area, and the wind tunnel effect that this proposed development might have.
Thank you. Councillor Adams, did you have a question?
So I heard you include the question about the densities, I think, in there, but I didn't hear the discussion about the height design for the buildings. I wonder if that can just be included so that we understand the context of it versus other parts of town. Thanks.
Councillor O'Meara, did you have an issue that was omitted?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't just a pedestrian crossing to the south, but also over to the west. So all 4 corners of that intersection will have to have access to the site. And then just again, and I apologize if it was incorporated in something, but just again, the Main Street element of what was supposed to be a focal gathering point for Northwest Oakville in that area, and whether we're achieving those goals. Thank you, Your Worship.
And Councillor McNeice?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just wanted to add, I just have in front of me the streetscape plan from 2012 for that area of Old Bronte Road and Casala Gate. And it's sort of got that area designated as a historic Bronte, Old Bronte Road North. So whether it's sort of in alignment with that plan. And then if there's any tools like inclusionary zoning that we can use there and you know, as they sort of come down the pipeline. And then I do have serious concerns about just the vehicular access with the islands that are, so, I mean, you cannot access Bronte Road going south from that site the way it's proposed. So maybe just a look at how the vehicles would get in and out of there, connecting to major roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Knoll.
Thanks for capturing all of the connections with respect to the commercial space. I heard it a couple times in there, but you did miss the one that I had raised, and that's with respect to a more significant historical treatment of that site in light of its importance in the history of Palermo, Trafalgar, and the town of Oakville.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Mr. Westerhoff, are you good now?
Yep. Through you, Mayor, I am. Thanks.
So is there a member of council who would like to move the indicated motion in the agenda? Councillor Nanda, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, seeing none, congratulations, Councillor Nanda. Your motion is carried unanimously. All right, that brings us to the Oakville Housing Strategy and Action Plan, including the Housing Accelerator Fund application. We have a presentation from Brad Sunderland, our senior planner, and Matt Day, the manager of development financing and investments. And we have no registered delegations. However, we will poll the audience for any further questions. And if I can find my little, here it is. And people watching at home are welcome to comment on the item if they call 905-815-6095 to be connected to the meeting. So let's give our attention now to Mr. Sunderland. No? Oh, well, the clerk doesn't want to take any callers on that one, and so maybe I made a mistake being too open or something. I apologize. Mr. Sunderland, I am sure that it's time to listen to you.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. So I'm happy to present to you tonight the town's housing strategy and action plan, including information on the town's Housing Accelerator Fund application. So the staff report for this item is found as discussion item 7.1 on tonight's agenda. So the purpose of the report before you this evening is to present the housing strategy and action plan as attached as Appendix A to the staff report for council approval. The staff report also brings forward information regarding the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation's Housing Accelerator Fund program, to which the town has applied. In order for the town's application to the Housing Accelerator Fund to proceed, council approval of an action plan is required. So the Housing Strategy and Action Plan was developed by town staff and informed by several documents, including Ontario's Housing Supply Action Plan, the Region of Halton's Comprehensive Housing Strategy, the Region of Halton's 2021 State of Housing Report, the Town of Oakville's Housing Information Report, which was brought forward to Council in May of 2022, the town's housing pledge to the province, and CMHC's Housing Accelerator Fund guidelines. Staff are aware that the Region of Halton has recently brought forward a 2022 State of Housing Report, and we will be looking at that. A best practice review of other municipal housing strategies and action plan was also undertaken in the development of this, the one for Oakville. The action plan provides an overview of the town's urban structure and provides the foundation for directing growth throughout the town. It also provides a housing snapshot that includes commentary on Oakville's housing mix, recent housing development, unbuilt housing in the development pipeline, affordability, and rental housing. In the spring of 2023, CMHC introduced the Housing Accelerator Fund program, which is discussed as part of this presentation. The town's deadline to apply to the HAF program was June 14th, to which the town applied. The Housing Accelerator Fund is a timely opportunity to advance the housing strategy and action plan for the town, as it will help achieve the town's recent housing pledge to the province and the Region of Halton's official plan housing target for the town, and provide housing opportunities for the acceleration of the delivery of housing. So the town's Livable Oakville plan provides the framework for how the town will grow and change into the future, and that's guided through its urban structure. The Livable Oakville Plan is founded on a mission statement and guiding principles, one of which is to provide choice throughout the town in order to enable the availability and accessibility of a wide range of housing, among others. The housing strategy provides an extension to the Livable Oakville Plan's mission statement and guiding principles and sets a path forward with goals and objectives to guide decision-making specific to housing. The action plan puts in place initiatives the town can undertake to achieve the goals and objectives of the strategy and ultimately the Livable Oakville Plan. Together, the housing strategy and action plan is the town's guiding document to improve the housing landscape across Oakville and achieve positive housing outcomes. The housing strategy and action plan is structured around 6 goals and objectives, which are intended to achieve 5 key housing outcomes. The plan includes nearly 70 actions the town can take over the coming years to improve the housing landscape in Oakville and strengthen its partnerships with upper levels of government, agency partners, and the development industry in the effort to deliver housing in Oakville. The housing strategy and action plan provides a comprehensive approach and identifies many opportunities that the town can take to strengthen its policies, regulations, programs, and bylaws for such matters as inclusionary zoning, rental housing and affordable housing, and housing supply. Some of these action items are currently underway, such as the development of a rental housing protection bylaw, which is also being discussed at tonight's council meeting. So as mentioned, the housing strategy is founded on 6 goals and objectives, and they are listed here, and I'll go through each one. So goal 1 is to support growth management and increase the housing supply, with the objective to identify, encourage, and enable housing opportunities within the town's urban structure, which functions as the foundation for growth management in Oakville. Goal 2 is to improve housing affordability, housing options, and housing choice, with the objective to enable a greater diversity of housing types in more places throughout the town where appropriate, focusing on housing types, sizes, and tenures that are in short supply and housing that improves affordability. And goal 3 is to streamline approvals with the objective to create new and enhanced processes that improve the efficiency of development approvals and the timely delivery of housing. Goal 4 is to make housing feasible, with the objective to ensure that the delivery of infrastructure and community service facilities are coordinated, appropriately funded, and implemented in alignment with growth to enable the delivery of housing and complete communities. Goal 5 is to engage, raise awareness, and build capacity, with the objective to engage town staff, agency partners, and the public to raise awareness and build the community capacity necessary to support the construction of a wide range of housing types that are needed throughout Oakville. And goal 6 is to collaborate with an objective to work with agency partners and other levels of government to achieve the goal of creating more housing while ensuring growth is contextually appropriate and fiscally responsible. The intent of the housing strategy and action plan is to achieve positive housing outcomes and improve the housing landscape in Oakville. Using the 6 foundational goals and objectives discussed and matching them with associated action items, the following housing outcomes are anticipated, which include increasing housing supply, improved affordability, enhanced housing choice, accelerated housing delivery, and the development of complete communities. The nearly 70 action items within the action plan are grouped under each goal of the housing strategy. Each action item is intended to achieve the positive housing outcomes discussed on the previous slide and result in the betterment of the housing landscape. The action items provide a comprehensive approach and identify many opportunities for the town. Each action item is accompanied by a key performance indicator to assist the town in tracking its progress. 7 action items are specifically identified in the action plan and are being used towards the Housing Accelerator Fund application, which is discussed in the next slides. So the Housing Accelerator Fund, or HAF, is a $4 billion federal program that was announced through the federal budget in 2022. The program runs until 2026 and 2027. The program is being administered by the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, or CMHC. The intent of the HAF program is to construct at least 100,000 more housing units across Canada than would have occurred without the program, and drive transformational change within the sphere of control of local government. The primary objective of the program is to create more housing at an accelerated pace and enhance certainty in the approvals and building processes while supporting 3 key priorities, which include supporting the development of complete communities that are walkable, consisting of appropriate residential density and a diverse mix of land uses, providing access to a wide variety of amenities and services through public and active transportation. The second is in supporting the development of affordable, inclusive, equitable, and diverse communities that encourage clear pathways to achieving greater socioeconomic inclusion, largely achieved through the equitable provision of housing across the entire housing spectrum. And lastly, supporting the development of low carbon and climate resilient communities. The HAF program is an application-based program with one application window in June of 2023. It's a 3-year program. Successful applicants to the program would receive funding in 4 installments over the course of the program. A council-approved action plan is required to participate in the HAF program. To apply to the HAF program, applicants must develop that action plan, which includes at least 7 initiatives or action items to accelerate the provision of housing, as well as a commitment to a housing supply growth target that increases the average annual rate of residential unit growth. Applicants to the program must also commit to completing a housing needs assessment report with a recurring review date and submit periodic reports to CMHC, including but not limited to progress reports on action plan initiatives, building permit data for residential buildings and units, and details of how the HAF funding was used. CMHC identified Oakville as a growth leader with the ability to achieve new housing supply through the HAF program. CMHC provided the deadline of June 14th for the town's formal application submission, which the town met. As part of the application, the town submitted an action plan, which includes the 7 initiatives from the broader housing strategy and action plan that will help to the town achieve and support the objectives of the HAF program. The initiatives listed here are included as part of the town's HAF application and are described in more detail in the housing strategy and action plan. This suite of initiatives have been selected to ensure the town is well positioned to achieve the housing supply growth target required by the HAF program. Some action items are intended to create short-term gains in housing supply within the 3-year HAF program horizon, and other action items are intended to enable the longer-term creation of housing units beyond the 3-year HAF program window. If the town's application is approved for funding, CMHC would provide funding on a per residential unit basis for units that are incented by initiatives in the action plan. There's a funding methodology that's applied of how CMHC looks at these units. So there's a base funding per HAF incented unit, and there's top-up funding available for certain types of housings provided, such as multi-unit housing. There's also an affordable housing bonus per residential unit, which is for any unit that's deemed to be affordable. The range in funding per unit for the town is approximately $20,000 to $51,000, depending on how the incented unit fits within the program's funding methodology parameters. And the town's application includes approximately 1,074 units incented by the HAF initiatives. So the use of the funding. The funding program operates with 4 equal advances, beginning at the execution of a contribution agreement, which would be signed by the town if the application is successful, and each unit anniversary of that date thereafter. So CMHC anticipates that a decision on applications in July and contribution agreements to be executed shortly thereafter, with the first funding advance to the town as early as August of this year. The permitted uses of the HAF funding include investments in the action plan items listed, investments in affordable housing, investments in housing-related infrastructure that supports housing, such as water and wastewater infrastructure, waste management, public transit, and site preparation for housing, as well as investments in community-related infrastructure that supports housing, such as local roads and bridges, active transportation, fire halls, landscaping, and green spaces. The permitted use of HAF funds are broad, and the allocation of funding is at the town's discretion. If the town's application to the HAF program is successful, town staff will allocate HAF funding to support the 7 initiatives proposed, as well as growth-related infrastructure projects that are in line with the permitted uses. The use of HAF funding is flexible and is to be determined. So given the application deadline for the HAF program was June 14th, and the submission requirement for the Housing Accelerator Fund included the action plan, staff did not have time to consult on the housing strategy and action plan prior to seeking council's approval at tonight's meeting. Community engagement on the housing strategy and action plan is of course important and is anticipated in future months, and staff intend to report back to council in early of 2024 on what was heard and refine the housing strategy and action plan as necessary. It's anticipated that the ongoing provincial initiatives will also need to be coordinated with the housing strategy and action plan, as well as refinements in response to the recent release of Halton Region's 2022 State of Housing Report. The approval of the Housing Strategy and Action Plan will allow the town to enter into a Housing Accelerator Fund contribution agreement if the application is successful. And securing HAF funding will allow the town to advance the initiatives selected from the Housing Strategy and Action Plan, as well as the funding of infrastructure that supports housing development. Securing HAF funding will provide the town with opportunities to better address the increasingly complex housing needs of the community and enable the delivery of a range and mix of housing and fund necessary community infrastructure. The HAF funding will also help the town to increase housing supply to meet the needs of a growing population, including meeting the housing targets set out in the Regional Halton Official Plan, as well as the town's recent housing pledge to the province. So with that, there are 5 recommendations rather, on the staff report listed here. So the first is that the Housing Strategy and Action Plan be approved. The second is that the component of the Housing Strategy and Action Plan regarding the Housing Accelerator Fund and the associated initiatives, those are the 7 initiatives listed specific for the application, be approved and not subject to change for the purpose of that application. That staff undertake a public engagement program on the Housing Strategy and Action Plan and report back to council on what was heard and refine the Housing Strategy and Action Plan as necessary in coordination with other ongoing provincial initiatives. And that should the town be successful in its Housing Accelerator Fund application, that staff be authorized to execute a Housing Accelerator Fund contribution agreement with CMHC to be executed in accordance with Bylaw 2013-057. And that staff initiate the necessary work programs required to complete the initiatives outlined for the Housing Accelerator Fund application, including undertaking the Housing Needs Assessment Report. And so that concludes the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Sunderland. And Councillor Elgar is first out of the box with his questions.
Thank you. Through Member Burton, thanks very much for the report. There's so much information in this report, it blows me away. My concern is that the recommendations, the 5 recommendations you refer to, I'm having trouble, I have no trouble with number 2, the Halton Accelerator Fund. Absolutely, we approve that without that, we can't get it moving. But then between recommendation 1 and 3, I can't understand it. First, we're going to approve something, and then we're going to go out and talk to the public to see what they think. Normally, we receive a report, and then go to get the public, get their input, and then we approve a plan. And I'm trying to, I hate if we're just doing it as fun to let the public go and read it, and then who cares, because they can always say, well, council already approved the plan. So how can we do it so that we totally want public input? And I heard you say, well, we can refine it. But what you're asking for is first to approve the housing strategy. Can we just approve the House Accelerator Fund and then go to the public and come back and then approve number 1 instead of approving what we've got now is recommendation 1 to approve? And then number 3, we're going to go to the public and tell them, we want your engagement to learn something here and help us make better decisions. Brad, what happened? I can't figure out why we're doing it that way, and what do we have to? Or is there a way out of this so we actually do want to go out and get public input before we do approve something?
Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor, that is an option. We discussed how to approach this. I think part of our concern was when we were working through the CMHC application form that we needed a full action plan approved by council, but knowing that we're kind of parsing out the 7 individual initiatives as separate from the rest, if we are ensuring that those are going to be approved, then that's kind of the main objective here. The other portion, if we wanted to have an approval in principle of the remainder of it, or if we want to go out and consult on it before we come back with an approval, it could work either way. If we have an approved document to say, this is what council's approved, what do you think? Or we've presented this to council and this is our chance for further refinements before we go back for a final approval. What do you think? We could frame the consultation either way, and I believe we would end up with refinements either way. So.
Well, I know, I appreciate that. So, but number two, I agree with you. We should approve that. Without that, we can't move forward for any money, correct?
Correct, yeah. It would be item number 2, and I guess item 4 and 5 would be associated with those as well.
Okay, well, okay, number 2 is a no-brainer. I'll be anxious to see if anybody else, you know, I would rather number 1 do a receive at this point, and then bring to, on number 3, take it to the public, and then come back to us, so that we definitely want the public input. So thanks, Brad. I'll wait to see how it goes.
Mr. Sunderland, would you like to comment on the effect of changing the word in number 1 from approved to received? Would we still have a viable application?
Through you, Your Worship, I believe so, yes. We would have the 7 initiatives approved. That would be in response to the action plan specific to the half application. That's what our need is right now. If we receive the remainder of the action plan and strategy more broadly, with the direction to do more public consultation and bring that back for a final approval, that is possible.
All right. So, Councillor Elgar, would you be prepared to move 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, where 1 is to read that the housing strategy and action plan be received? Absolutely. Thank you for that. And we'll now turn for other comments and questions. And it's always good to have a question on the floor so we know what we're debating. Councillor Chisholm, and then O'Meara, then McNeice.
Thank you, Worship. I concur with Councillor Elgar's new recommendation. I really believe this, we're kind of doing this kind of in a backward motion, and to receive it, I'm full support of that. We always criticize we don't do enough community engagement, and sometimes when our community engagement comes out, it's very prescriptive. So it's embodied within ourselves to make sure that we have the discussions and the talks with our residents with this, and not to say it's already done, it's a done deal. We just want to have some token conversations. We don't want that. So it's very important that we do that first and then get our approvals as we move forward. So I just leave it as that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Recommendation number 4, where it says we approve funding. Do we have an idea of how much money we might be authorizing to put into a fund?
Well, Councillor, before staff answer, it's roughly $1,000, 1,000 units, and the range is 21,000 to 51,000, so it's $20 to $50 million, depending on the mix.
From the town's perspective into that?
It's $20 to $50 million to come to the town from CMHC.
Okay, but I was of the understanding that we also had to put money into that pot too, did we not?
I don't remember that part of the presentation.
Sorry, I apologize, I misread that, that's fine. Thank you for that. In any of these initiatives, is there any funding to sort of work with the actual building community, say, to help build houses, or to work with say trade schools, or to help bring the labor force together? I mean, it seems like it's the pile on the government because we're the problems here. And I'm wondering, is there any way to use this money to try and do some things that are actually, problematic with people putting nails into wood frames and building houses here? Is there anything there?
So the permitted uses for the half funding are specific to the action plan items that are put forward, the creation of affordable housing, and then infrastructure that would support community infrastructure or more hard infrastructure such as sewers and that sort of thing. What I can say is that in the action plan, the action items that aren't included in the HAF application specifically, we do identify those as action items as something to do with collaboration and building capacity with our building community. We do realize that it's a challenge through the HAF program, given that it's intended to create units and build units, and that's what the funding is based on. Whereas we know as the town, our role is really to enable and engage and create opportunity, and then it goes over to the building development industry to build and create the actual unit. So we are relying on the creation of units from them. I don't believe, based on the HAF funding, how we're allowed to use it, that it could go towards that.
So would you say in your reading of the application and the process, I mean, is this more tailored to, let's grab some town land and turn that into building homes because we can control that, or is it just trying to streamline our processes? I mean, what are they trying to get at here that they want us to do that we're not already doing differently, but they just want to pick up the tab for? I'm trying to figure out what it is that they're trying to unlock that we're not already on the road doing.
So through your worship, to the councillor, that's a great question. We worked very closely with CMHC staff in the development of our application. And that was one of the challenges that we continually pointed out to them, because we are on track to do a lot of these things already. And a lot of the initiatives for the HAF fund had to be new initiatives that hadn't already previously been done. And well, Oakville, we're already doing a lot of it. And we're trying. Which is great, but I mean, unfortunate in the sense that we can't use those initiatives for the HAF program. And so what we've identified in the initiatives are things such as that would actually create units within the 3-year time horizon. We have initiative 1, 2, 3, and 7 that we identified as potential for creating units within the 3-year window. So that includes some of the policy enhancements and fee updates that were done through the development charge bylaw, which had already taken place. So we could backtrack some of our initiatives to the date of the release of the federal budget to April of 2022. So anything that happened after that date, we could include. So some of it's a little bit, we've already done it, and now we're kind of sweeping it up into this program, which is great because of the timelines matched. So that one, and then we also have the permissions for accessory dwelling units, which has already gone through in our zoning bylaws, so we're now allowed to have 3 units per site. And then the other one was a town surplus land. Again, that's a public works site. I know that was recently transferred to the Oakville Municipal Development Corporation, so there's opportunities there to realize some housing units on that site. And then the last one was the application processing. So some of the digital enhancements would essentially fast track, or we could get more development through the pipeline faster. So we grabbed some units that would have, say, happened in year 4 and slightly moved them forward to realize additional units through that. So that's how we were realizing the units within the 3-year window. And then the remainder of the initiatives are more long-term initiatives, policy-focused initiatives, which would realize a lot of housing, but it just wouldn't happen in the next 3 years in terms of building permits.
Okay, no, I appreciate that, and I mean, we've fallen victim to our own success sometimes with FCM grants and AMO grants, where they're trying to bring people up to a level, and if you're already ahead of the curve a bit, you can be penalized by not getting that funding because you're not lagging behind. So I was just trying to read the tea leaves a little bit. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McNeice and Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the presentation. That was really helpful. I just wanted to support receiving the housing strategy action plan as opposed to approve it, because I think the public engagement is going to be key. I noticed, like many, that in Toronto's by-election, the top issues were affordability, housing, rental, and I heard many good examples of things that could be done that I wasn't even aware of. Like one was in Montreal, they get the right of first refusal of any rental building being sold, which will probably come up in our next item. That can, first option is it can go into an MDC, a Municipal Development Corporation or something like that. But from coast to coast, I think there's really good ideas out there, and I think the engagement, as you've suggested, would be really helpful for us. So I just want to express my support for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Adams. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Just for clarity, I'm trying to understand with this money coming in, I'm just kind of dovetailing on Councillor O'Mara's comments. Is this money coming in, to me, looking at your 7 initiatives, they're more of administrative efficiencies and bringing them up to speed in order to cut the red tape, supposedly. Is that the intent? I need just to help me out in this one.
So through your worship to the councillor, some of the funding that we would receive if the application is successful, first off, some of the funding we would receive could go towards the implementation of these initiatives. So it would go towards staff time that would otherwise not have. We wouldn't necessarily be working on these initiatives in the next 3 years, but we're kind of fast tracking those things. So that would be staff time or consulting fees or anything.
So is it safe to say, Brad, that the money coming in is not putting nails into the boards and hammering it on the siding of a home? It's not reducing the house or the unit itself. Is that correct?
Through your worship to the councillor, no. It is not creating the actual housing. We are still very much dependent on our building partners and the development industry to realize the creation of housing.
Thank you.
Councillor Adams?
Thanks very much. First of all, thank you very much for the staff report that includes the Housing Strategy and Action Plan. It's got an awful lot of really good work in it. And I know it's only the listing of all the work to come because it's got years worth of effort that will come after it. And I think it's a great idea that we ask for public comment on it because there may be some additional areas of interest. There may be some areas that we should prioritize first and so forth. I wondered, in terms of the public engagement process that we're considering, can we make sure that we try to engage very specifically housing affordability organizations? I know there's a group out west called Generation Squeeze that may not have the specific knowledge of Ontario's framework or policy frameworks that we have, but they have conceptual ideas. And I'm sure there are similar organizations that are Ontario-based and focused that we could forward this action plan, this strategy to try and get feedback as to whether there are other things that a municipality in Ontario should be considering in terms of this kind of a framework. So I'm not sure what beyond just posting it on our website we had in mind.
Through your worship to the councillor, I think we're very much open to suggestions for how we want to advance a public consultation program. One of the ideas that we were batting about was having an online survey of some sort to ask members of the public, is there anything on here that's missing? Is there any other ideas that are being generated that we haven't captured? Anything you specifically agree with has priority. But there's definitely opportunities to reach out specifically to any kind of housing affordability groups, get their feedback, and put the Housing Strategy and Action Plan in front of them to get their comments.
And I'm assuming it's already been seen by some members of Halton Region's staff, given the relationship.
Through your worship to the councillor, we've chatted with the housing team at Halton Region. And we've had a few meetings with them.
Okay, so it sounds
they are aware.
So it sounds like it could go to the region as well as a starting point for conversation. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Haslett-Neal.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. Thank you very much for the report. Just consistent with what everyone else has raised so far, I would concur and thank Councillor Elgar for receiving it rather than approving tonight, and the importance of tying it into an effective public consultation process so that we hear from the bright, intelligent, committed homeowners and future homeowners what they feel and what they could suggest. So I concur with that. What you mentioned doing a scan of other municipalities' best practices. What did you take away from the other municipalities in terms of the quality or anything unique or different that you felt we could do, or maybe you didn't include it, but you think it's worth considering?
Through your worship to the councillor. So some of the ones that jumped out at me when I was doing kind of a scan, Mississauga has done some great work for their action plan items. And the region of Waterloo or the city of Waterloo had a great layout in terms of, you know, linking their action items with key performance indicators and the housing outcomes rather. That was quite efficient in the way that they presented all that information and succinctly. So we kind of used that framework as reflected in ours. In terms of actual action items, there's a lot of the same across the board from all the municipalities. I think Ontario municipalities are a little challenged in the actual creation of units and housing. We do a lot of enabling and a lot of policy work, but it's quite challenging within the framework we have legislatively to do some of the projects that might be available in other jurisdictions. I think that was one of the things that really stuck out when we had our conversations with CMHC from the Ontario context and what we can and can't do from a legislative perspective. So a lot of it was dealing with, you know, encouraging the province to maybe do something with legislation to give municipalities tools to do work. So there's a lot of that.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. You had mentioned, or I think it's mentioned in the report about as of right zoning changes. Given that as of right zoning raises a lot of people's kind of awareness of, whoa, wait a minute, will you incorporate that in very comprehensively into the public consultation, or do you see it as separate in terms of trying to, once you have completed whatever you determine you want to recommend on the zoning, would it then be a separate sort of discussion with the public about as of right?
So through your worship to the councillor. So from the housing strategy and action plan perspective, I think it would be more high level in terms of our action items and how we want to proceed. And that would be the discussion that would be had at that level. And then each one of these action items would have its own work program, would also have its own consultation component to it. So if we are moving forward with the as of right zoning intensification permissions, there will be some sort of, or a component of consultation on that specific item as well. So I know action initiative 6 as part of the HAF application, specifically, that one really focuses on, say, the Bronte Go MTSA. We're required by legislation, once we've identified an area as an MTSA and have approved policies in place, to actually put as of right zoning in place within 1 year. We're kind of already beyond that here. So we are required to do it from a legislative standpoint anyways, to put that as of right of zoning in. It would likely result in, you know, if we did put as of right zoning, it would likely result in the whole area having holding provisions, given we need to infrastructure to support any of the housing. So it would still require some sort of process, even beyond an as of right zone. They'd still have to go through a lifting of a holding provision to ensure that we have adequate facilities from an infrastructure perspective.
I'll leave it to my council colleagues to maybe pick up on the Bronte piece. Can I just confirm then that Midtown has that 1 year provision? Are you waiting on the OPA amendment decision to get started on what you would consider as of right zoning?
Through your worship to the councillor, I believe the 1 year starts after the approval of an official plan amendment.
Okay.
So once that official plan amendment's in place and we understand what the actual policy context is, then we can tailor zoning to implement the policies. But until those policies are in place, we can't really do that.
Okay, all right, thank you for clarifying that. Will the funds, if we are fortunate enough to get the accelerator funds, will they be put into a reserve fund? And I'm looking up at Matt. Will they be put in a reserve fund and drawn down from that reserve fund? Or will they be allocated to different departments? I just wanted to understand the significance of that money could make a difference in multiple areas.
Through you, Mayor Burton, yes, they would be put in a reserve fund because the way the funding works is we get advances, 4 advances over the course of the program. And what we would be doing is looking at what projects fit the parameters of the program and are the best strategic use of this funding to support our growth-related infrastructure. So we would be putting those in reserve funds, and then similar to our normal capital budget process, looking at which specific projects to use the funding for.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. My next question is around Midtown, and it's in that the half section. There's a phrase in there that says the development community will be incentivized. Can you just tell me specifically what is the incentive that you're referencing?
Through you, your worship, to the councillor, perhaps not the best of words to use, incentivized, but essentially what it is that the actual policy framework will be in place, so they will have a greater clarity of what's the intent and expected development parameters.
Okay, all right, thank you. I just wanted to make sure. I wanted to comment, you have the advisory panel under Goal 5 in the action plan. What a great idea. I think it actually came up from Councillor McNeice on Midtown as well, but I really love that concept. And I'm coming to the end of my question. Sorry, I'm just going to go quickly. In terms of, and I think this is perhaps for the director or maybe even the CAO, I'd like a confirmation if there's any language in the document related to the half accelerator. Is there anything in there that binds the town to a level of intensification in terms of FSI or people and jobs per hectare other than what is stated currently for Bronte and Midtown?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, nothing in the half or within the initiatives which says that there's, which predetermines council's decisions on that.
Okay, thank you for confirming that for us. And is there a map showing the land owned by Infrastructure Ontario in Oakville, as well as the town-owned vacant lands that would be relevant for council to see related to the housing strategy?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that is something that we can certainly work on and take back and create something for council. We have been looking at what are those town-owned lands and where are there certain opportunities. We'll incorporate that with ones that IO already has identified.
Because when I went through, I do see there's an encouragement for the province to use their lands as well, but it just didn't jump out at me that we had that information. So thank you. And I guess my last question is around current densities. So some of the language in the strategy refers to high density, and yet what one party might think is high density, another party might not. I think some of the planners often refer to the phrase, there's a contextual nature to high density. Is there anything that could be done to give greater clarity so that when we're talking about a housing strategy, we have a bit more clarity on what is high density, whether it's FSI, whether it's people and jobs? I'm looking for your expertise in this area.
Through your worship to the councillor, that's something that we can explore in terms of policy context. What I can say right now is that if it is a residential project in the livable Oakville plan area, our high density range from units per site hectare range is, I believe, about 60 to 185. And then within some of our corridors, such as the Trafalgar Road corridor, it goes up to 300 units per site hectare. Within a mixed use designation, typically what we've done thus far is use a height limit as the kind of barometer for how much development you can get on a site. There's not necessarily a units per site hectare associated with that. I know with recent amendments, such as the one that came forward in draft form for Midtown Oakville, looking at opportunities for FSI or floor space index. And so maybe there's an opportunity there to identify, at a certain FSI, that's what's considered high density. But typically for an FSI, it's controlling the massing on a site rather than the individual units within a building. So it's kind of a different tool, and it's used largely from a kind of built form perspective rather than the specific number of units that are going to be enabled. So there's kind of two ways to get at the problem, or two ways to get at the solution. And they're just different approaches to use. So that's definitely something that we can look at of what's considered high density. That's what I can offer.
Well, Brad, I am looking for a solution. So thank you for raising that. And I hope that you can help us get that clarity, because the contextual nature of development, the more we can bring some clarity to it, the less friction we will have. And, you know, while we move to possibly some form of as-of-right zoning, people need to understand, and we need to be talking the same language. 20 may seem high to some folks, and 30 may seem high to others, and 9 may seem high to others. So I thank you. If you could turn your minds to that, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McNeice?
Through your worship, just one more question for you, Brad. I know we have a staff report in for more information on community planning permits, and I'm just sort of reading through this, seeing a number of policy initiatives, and is there an opportunity here to sort of dovetail that work into it, or even in the housing strategy and action plan, or is there sort of a fit for that work? Maybe it's over to the director.
Through your worship to the councillor, we can take that back and look at that as an option and see.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Council, I think you're ready to make a decision. Council has it. Thank you very much. Is there any objection to Councillor Elgar's motion? Madam Clerk, there's no objection visible. I declare that motion carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody, for your time and your attention and your questions. And I would like to say that I do appreciate the federal government having taken this step to address with money the problem of housing supply, since their changes to immigration are certainly driving the need for housing. So it's good to see them put some money where their immigration policy is, so to speak. And I want to point with happiness at some of the permitted uses of the money we might receive. Local roads and bridges, active transportation, fire halls, landscaping, green spaces, site preparation, disaster mitigation, public transit, waste management, and water and wastewater infrastructure. And yes, we do some of that. So, and then there's the investments in affordable housing, as well as investments in action plans. So it's actually quite a nice program they've come up with, and I am grateful to them. Council, can we turn to item 7.2 now, the Oakville Housing Strategy Rental Housing Protection Bylaw and Demolition Control Bylaw. Our Assistant Town Solicitor, Dennis Perlin, has a presentation. We have no registered delegations, but I do hope that you will be delighted with this. I know I am, and I remember a new councillor mentioning one day that we might need one of these, or wished that we had one anyway. And here you are. Your wish is granted. Mr. Perlin.
Thank you, Your Worship, and members of council. I'm going to be getting assistance from my good friend up on the podium, up on the behind me, who's going to move the slides, because whenever I do it, I either forget or skip, and so I thank him for that assistance. This report deals with a proposed rental housing protection bylaw and a demolition control bylaw, and is part of the action plan strategy related to the rental housing component, particularly our existing rental housing supply in the town. You will see that on slide 1, 2, and 3, next slide, please. There are 3 recommendations. First slide, that the approach and criteria proposed for the rental housing protection bylaw is outlined on the report that's on the addendum in front of you be endorsed. The next slide and the next recommendation are that the following proposed bylaws, the rental housing protection bylaw and the demolition control bylaw, be passed. And you'll see that they are on the addendum for passage this evening if you find them acceptable. The third recommendation deals with the work that will still have to be done in order to implement the rental housing protection bylaw, and that is that the town solicitor, in consultation with the Commissioner of Community Development, be directed to prepare all the necessary documentation that will implement the bylaw, and implement the Section 99.1 permit application process with conditions and agreements for the protection of the rental housing supply of Oakville and affected tenants. So those are the recommendations. In terms of the information with respect to considering the bylaws and then determining whether to pass them. Next slide, please. The key facts that are in the report, the proposed bylaws, as I said, complement the housing strategy. The rental housing protection bylaw is used to regulate the demolition and conversion of rental housing to some other purpose. And at the same time, the demolition control bylaw under Section 33 of the Planning Act is a complementary bylaw that's needed to be passed in order to help ensure that demolition permits are not issued prior to a permit under the section, what is called Section 99.1, a rental housing protection bylaw, the magic Section 99.1 of the Municipal Act, and prevents demolition permits being issued for residential properties in general under the Building Code Act before an approved plan is in place for a new building on the site. So that's necessary so that a person doesn't just rush in and get a demolition permit and avoids the application of the rental housing protection bylaw and getting a permit to proceed with the demolition or first. So the next slide, if I could. This slide and the next slide deal with the question of how the town can protect the supply of rental housing. And that's the purpose of the Section 99.1 of the Municipal Act, to allow councils to pass bylaws to prohibit or regulate the demolition and conversion of residential rental properties containing 6 or more units. Now that's a legislative requirement. It has to be a complex with 6 or more rental units. No, it can't be less. And the mechanism that's used to regulate such demolition or conversion is a Section 99.1 permit. That's the usual reference to them. And they are issued with conditions, and they're secured by a registered agreement. The only municipalities in the province to date that we know of that have passed those are the City of Toronto, and they do it under a provision which is similar to Section 99.1, but is under the City of Toronto Act, and the City of Mississauga, which has passed one under Section 99.1. The only completed applications and processing of applications, and there have been many, many, are in the City of Toronto. While Mississauga passed the bylaw in 2019, they have had a couple of applications that have not been processed to fruition, but the City of Toronto has done many. And I can say to you that this presentation, the bylaw, and some of the conditions that I will mention as I proceed are based on how the City of Toronto has addressed those. They are addressed, the negotiations are confidential until there's an agreement reached, but the agreement needs to be approved before it comes into effect. And that proposal is made public and does is reviewed with existing tenants. It's publicly put forward and approved by, first of all, at their community council level and then their city council level. Next slide, please. And then this slide, then that was in general the rental housing protection bylaw. This slide deals with the demolition control bylaw. And as I mentioned earlier, it declares a demolition control area, which in this case would be the entire town, to prevent the premature demolition of residential properties before an approved plan is in place for a building replacement at the site. And one can see the value of that, not only for rental housing, but also in terms of any residential property being demolished that left as a vacant lot or left as a vacant lot or any premature eviction, et cetera, even from those that won't qualify, if you like, under this rental housing protection bylaw. So, and in the specific case to address this evening, it does mean that there can't be a demolition, as I said earlier, until a Section 99.1 permit has been applied for and received if the rental housing protection bylaw is in effect. Next slide. The next two slides will address the question of what types of units are affected and not affected. This one is a slide dealing with what's affected. It applies to the demolition or conversion proposals of residential rental properties containing 6 or more rental units. And that is a conversion proposal to any use other than rental residential. And this, in terms of the types, it includes apartments, townhouses, of course, any complex with 6 or more rental units that were built at the outset as rental housing, and they're often called the primary rental market. The next slide are those that are not affected. So, and this is, I'll say, use the word dictated to us by legislation. That is, unlike the primary rental market, units in the secondary rental market, so you have your rented condominiums, you have your second and now third units in or accessory to homes, those are not included because of the limitations of Section 99.1. Also, because of that limitation, rental units are similarly exempt from a Section 99.1 bylaw that are in equity cooperatives, co-ownership properties, lodging homes, and designated and nonprofit housing projects owned, operated, or managed by Halton Region. Next slide. The next 4 slides address how the bylaw will work. So a proposed demolition and or conversion application comes in for a Section 99.1 permit. They're received, they're evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and conditions for approvals are established that aim to mitigate any adverse effects on the current supply of rental housing and on the existing tenants in terms of providing for providing provisions beyond the minimum requirements of the Residential Tenancy Act, which, 3 months rent or another unit acceptable to the tenant, 120 units, 120 days notice. Those are the basic requirements at present under the Residential Tenancies Act. Section 99.1 bylaw does allow the improvement of that tenant protection package for existing tenants in proposals that are coming forward for demolition or for conversion. Next slide. The bylaw does propose that when the Section 99.1 permit applications be delegated to the Commissioner of Community Development, except when Town Council, the Mayor, or any of the ward councilors in which the subject site is located request particular applications to be considered and decided upon by Town Council. Some of those that in fact may get directed even by the Commissioner may be where there are related applications. As one saw with the latest, the most recent application that generated consideration for this, as the Mayor mentioned at the start, on rental housing protection measures, the 50 Spears Road, those may come forward just as a matter of processing together. So an OPA, a ZBA, and a Section 99.1 permit application in order to integrate all of the decisions that council may have to make with respect to those. Second, there's a Section 99.1 permit guidelines. Those guidelines are established by the Commissioner in consultation with the solicitor, and they're used to set out the application forms, the notice procedures to existing tenants, the process that's going to be followed, the procedures, the fees that will be charged for the making of these applications, and then the form of agreements that would be entered into as a result of an approval. And for each Section 99.1 permit application, a staff report will be prepared for the consideration of the commissioner or the town council, as the case may be, setting out the proposal and how it is intended that that be handled, including the conditions and the terms of the agreement. Next slide. This slide, the process, as I said, once the guidelines are established, an application are established, then they will be triggered, as I said, by the provision of an application, and the result of the process would be a Section 99.1 permit approval with appropriate conditions imposed and secured by an agreement registered on title, so it is binding on future owners as well as the existing owner. Next slide. In considering each application, the objectives of the bylaw would be used to evaluate that application. And so there is the preservation of the existing rental housing supply, the preservation of the affordable rental housing supply, the existing affordable rental housing supply, and then there are balancing conditions that one has to consider in terms of the increase of purpose-built rental housing, which is an objective. Then there's the improvement of existing rental housing stock, which is an objective. An enhanced tenant protection package over the RTA for existing and eligible tenants, and then a formalized, consistent process which achieves an appropriate rental housing protection package in the particular circumstances. So those are the those are the objectives, and each of those would be part of the consideration of any application coming forward. Now, the next 12 slides, I'll try and go through them very quickly. They are examples of type of conditions that get established if in considering a Section 99.1 permit application under the bylaw. So you have the critical preservation of existing rental supply for 20 years or more. So the number of rental housing units coming forward, those being preserved in either the demolition or the conversion. The 20 years, that does come from the City of Toronto. One could attempt to achieve more than 20, and that's it. That's why it's 20 years or more. But I will say to you that applications that have been considered in the city have been 20 years or more. That is defined by the city's own official plan in Toronto, which does provide for that limitation. But so we've sort of set that as one that is recognizable at this time in terms of what has happened in dealing with rental housing protection bylaws on an operable basis. The second is the preservation of existing affordable rental housing supply. In many projects, there are, of course, the number of rental housing, and some, by virtue of, may have been affordable, a tenant moves out, market rent is in effect. But at the time of the application, if there are affordable rental housing units, which is defined through the region and its housing, annual housing report, regional councilors and others may be familiar with that. Those we also try to preserve that as an existing, as an affordable rental housing supply for 10 years. And again, that it does come out of the handling of applications in the city, and it is an official plan requirement in the city, a limitation, 10 years for affordable, 20 years for the rental housing supply, and here I've set out as 10 years or more. On the next slide, an enhanced third condition of critical nature, enhanced tenant protection package for existing and eligible tenants, re-tenant compensation, relocation, and assistance, which could include the following that I'll list that based on particular circumstances. It's not exhaustive, and there may be others and different ones depending on various projects that come forward. For existing tenants, at least 6 months to vacate rather than the RTA requirement for 4. Additional requirement in terms of an applicant under Section 99.1 application to provide guidance and assistance to tenants that are being evicted from the demolished or being removed from the demolished or need to be displaced for a conversion, in finding a new apartment unit while they, until they come back to their replacement rental unit. Receiving, of course, the RTA compensation of 3 months rent or an alternative unit acceptable to the tenant. Next, for eligible tenants, there are an eligible tenant. What has been found in many of these applications is that there is a time frame when a landlord, a developer will let the existing tenants know that they are preparing an application, they're about to make an application, and any tenant who comes in after that is provided with their rental documents, a document that's clear that indicates to the tenant they are there for a short-term rental, this building is going to be demolished, or this building is going to be converted. So the conditions I'm talking to now are for those who have not received as part of that, part of their rental package, regardless of the date of application. If they have not, if they're a tenant existing on that date and they have not received as part of their rental package any indication that that is a short-term rental, that it will be, this building is subject to demolition or conversion, and an application is being made for that, then the following type of conditions are often set. 1, the right to return to occupy one of the replacement rental units of a similar layout, studio, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom as they had, or 3 bedroom if they had, or of a similar unit size in terms of gross floor area, and at a similar rent, subject to the annual RTA guideline increase from the date of vacating their existing rental unit and the building to be demolished or converted, to the date of occupancy of the replacement rental unit, plus some consideration of a small construction, a one-time construction percentage increase in terms of the new amenities and improved amenities over what they may have had in their rental building. 2 moving allowances, 1 to move out to their temporary unit and 1 to move back, and often the amounts are determined on what type of unit they held, whether it was a studio or a 1 apartment versus an increased amount if you had a larger family 2 bedroom if you like. Another example condition, next slide, is additional compensation for those who are the eligible tenants in form of rent gap payments for rent in the temporary apartment unit to the date of occupancy of the new replacement unit. Another is, and I throw in a lot of different ones, and you can see access to bicycle parking at no charge and on the same terms and conditions as it is offered to any other resident of the proposed development. Next slide. Replacement rental units are required to be made ready and available for occupancy no later than a certain date, and depending on the type of project and how long it is intended reasonably to take to construct. But there's a set date for that. For special needs tenants, relocation assistance of additional 4 months rent in addition to moving allowances. And again, I'm saying example, depending on the context, could be more, could be less, but a recognition of the need to to accommodate eligible special needs tenants. Next slide. of the replacement rental unit rent at the last monthly rent charged at the date of vacating, as I said earlier, subject only to annual RTA guideline increases from the date of vacating the existing rental unit to the date of occupancy, plus a one-time new construction increase. Next slide, separate costs for utilities, which will be metered separately. Annual rent increases thereafter to continue to apply according to the then existing Residential Tenancy Act guidelines once they have their beginning rent. Then rent on replacement parking space and or lockers of any returning tenant being maintained at the monthly rents in effect when a returning tenant vacates, subject to annual RTA guideline increases and perhaps a one-time construction increase. Next slide. Access to and use of all the indoor and outdoor amenities in the proposed development at no extra charge and on the same terms and conditions as any other resident. Provision of an ensuite laundry in each replacement rental unit within the proposed development, no additional cost to tenants. Next slide. Provision of central air conditioning in each replacement rental unit within the proposed development at no additional cost to the tenants. Next, access to visitor vehicular parking at no charge and on the same terms and conditions as is offered to any other resident of the proposed development. And then there may be eligible tenants who wish to voluntarily waive their right of return. So there are in some proposals that have been processed, special compensation payments. And that is to allow for those who do voluntarily waive to get a certain amount of additional compensation, and they may, for personal and family reasons or moving, determine that they cannot exercise the right of return or do not wish to. And so there's a recognition of that. That is done very, very cautiously so as not to be used as a mechanism to avoid a landowner, developer, landlord to avoid having to give the right of return, because the objective is to protect the existing rental housing supply. And the next slide. That third condition of an enhanced tenant protection package, those were all samples. In particular, and one has to look at the existing circumstance. The last two conditions, the condition to erect the project no later than 3 years or as applicable, as I said earlier, in terms of the context, from the date on which the demolition commences, but subject to the time frame being extended if it's reasonable to do so. The next slide. Another important condition is the consequence of failing to complete the project within the time frame, and that is, should the owner fail to complete the proposed project, then the Crown Treasurer shall be entitled to enter on the property tax collector's roll an amount per replacement dwelling unit for which the demolition permit was issued. There is the last condition I'm going to mention this evening, but another very important condition, and that is for a registered executed agreement that encompasses all the conditions, and it's binding on the present and future owners. The next two slides are a list of, and they're set out in the report, so I won't go through them again in completely. But the approval of the demolition control bylaw is very, very important, as well as if one is going to pass the rental housing protection. The cash in lieu contribution, that is if there are circumstances that mechanism needs to be used in terms of the constraint of a particular site, a particular proposal. There may be, the idea is to get 1-for-1 of every replacement rental unit, but if there are circumstances that are felt good reasons that you see for a particular rental replacement unit, two replacement unit not being replaced by the way the building is set up or other requirements related to the building, then there could be an opportunity for that. by way of cash in lieu. And if there is cash in lieu, then there's a need for a reserve fund. I'll go by the next slide, if we could, and go to the next slide. And that's the next slide, please. The conclusion then is through the issuance of a Section 99.1 permit with conditions and secured by a registered agreement on title, the proposed rental housing protection bylaw is recommended to proactively address present and future proposals to demolish existing residential housing properties containing 6 or more residential rental units and or convert such properties for uses other than for residential rental units. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Perlin. You've generated some questions. But first, just out of procedure and courtesy, let me ask Councillor McNeice if he would like the honor of being the mover of this when we get there.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you. All right, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor O'Meara, Councillor McNeice, Councillor Knoll, and Councillor Lischenna.
Thank you, Worship. Just background information why this report has come forward, and I want to congratulate Councillor Duddick and ourselves working with this issue at 50 Spears Road. It initiated this report. We did have talks with the consultants representing the owners. We did not have a good agreement with respect to our conversations with the consultants. We met with the residents at 50 Spears Road, and I just want to acknowledge that we did a lot of legwork with the residents, and this has come out. I am very happy with this report, Dennis, and it's very detailed. There's only a couple of minor questions. The question I have is the construction increase. Is there an upset limit to that? Because it seems to be something that might be a loophole with respect to coming back, and a construction increase might be from, if it's reasonable, say 2 or 3%, but it could go high as what? I mean, this concerns me, this construction.
In Mississauga, in terms of their guidelines, they've set 3%. I can tell you in the city of Toronto, they do not provide for a construction increase component. The reason in our discussion with the city of Mississauga and why that was there is under the RTA, there is an opportunity when you do improve your existing rental supply to achieve an amount over the RTA annual guideline increase. That's a so-called automatic increase in a rent. And so if you can demonstrate that what you're putting in to your building to improve it, whether it's a new heating or certain energy conservation measures or new plumbing, et cetera, that can be built into an application that does have to be approved by the Landlord and Tenant Tribunal in terms of that. So the argument that is made by a person putting up a new purpose-built rental is that there should be some recognition that if we had done an improvement in the existing building and made some improvements, which will be what the returning tenants will now see in this new building, then we would have gotten some recognition for that over the usual annual RTA guideline. So their request is based on seeking that. Now, that guideline, that amount can be quite significant under the Residential Tenancy Act. But that's the theory. Does one have to do that? No, one doesn't. And Section 99.1 permit is not appealable to the Ontario Land Tribunal. The bylaw itself is not appealable. And you'll note that's not in the bylaw per se. But it is, I'm bringing forward to you those type of conditions that have been requested. So it wouldn't be a surprise to you if you ever saw that type of request. That's the basis for that. And whether that should happen or not would be considered with each.
So to assume that it could be part of the remuneration or whatever the case may be down the line when a tenant comes back in, is it is it, the evidence have to come forward to the tenant, and how much money has been spent on the improvements, of showing these improvements and dividing them out by the units, and what that construction increase would be?
Not for the new. I was using that as the basis as to why they considered, if the building had remained, wasn't demolished, and the landlord was just improving it, under existing situation, they can get an increase beyond the guideline that represents the increased costs they've spent on improving that building. That's the analogy, that the new developer tears down the old, puts up the new, and says, look, I'm providing up-to-date energy conservation, up-to-date plumbing, brand new amenities, brand new common areas, and so I should get something beyond just the returning rent plus RTA guidelines from the time of the building going down to the new. So the direct answer to your question is, it's something that would be considered by the commissioner, or if the council demands that wants the application here, then it's something you would consider at that time, if that applicant for this new building was requesting, I want RTA guidelines and I want that construction increase. It'd be something that you would then question and determine at that point as to whether you think it's worthy of your support in that particular instance or not. I don't know if that's helpful to you.
I don't know if I'm unclear or totally confused.
What he said is, it's your call, it's council's call.
Okay, council's call. So if it's council's call, the question, I'm gonna go back to this construction increase. It's being submitted by the owners of the building.
Right.
The questions are directed to the owners of the representatives of that ownership. That's where I would ask that question at that time. Okay, so it's an application, and we can ask those type of questions. Okay, so it's not fait accompli with
No, it's not built in. No,
okay, that's fine. The other question I had was under your conditions of permit approval. I don't know what slide it was because they weren't numbered. It was about guidance. There was a line
and
there.
Assistance to
assistant guidance. Yeah.
Tenants.
Who's doing that? Who would do that? Is that the responsibility of the owner, or who would assist them, assist the tenants?
That is the owner's responsibility. In the city, for example, they do require a relocation representative paid for and provided by the owner to assist tenants in finding other accommodation for the temporary period that they're displaced.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you for the report. It's very well detailed. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I know 50 Spears Road sort of pushed this onto the front burners, but how many cases are we seeing yearly of 6 or above rental being converted to private ownership? What plague has epoxed our houses here that we're looking at?
I think perhaps Gabe might be better able to address that in terms of any applications. But it isn't, and it wasn't, in terms of, even in the city of Toronto, there are not a lot of applications comparatively to the city. But the idea was to at least have a proactive bylaw in place that allows council to address any of these rental complexes, should they ever come forward, and not to be faced with having to deal with one that comes forward and after the application's already been made. Important for a developer is bringing a purpose-built rental or even a conversion of an existing, to know that if they come forward in the town, they will have to address the protection of our existing rental housing supply in the town and our affordable housing supply, and in terms of being fairer to the tenants than the Residential Tenancies Act. So I would say to you, I don't know of the number. I would believe it's very, very small, subject to Gabe indicating otherwise. But again, this is presented to you as a proactive way of ensuring these matters get addressed in a way that's recognized by the Municipal Act and the Planning Act.
So what consultation have we done with rental property owners on this to date?
On this report?
Yeah.
None.
Do we know how many rental property owners we have in Oakville that this would pertain to?
We don't have that detail.
How do we define demolition? Is that bringing it right down to the foundation, or would that be just if people have to move out? What are we defining as demolition?
Any rental building where 6 or more rental units are being demolished or converted. So if it's a rental building that has 6 or more units, if it's 6 or more of those that are being significantly altered to the purpose of, to the point of where they're actually having to be reconstructed, that's considered a demolition for the purpose of the rental housing protection law.
Well, that's my one of my concerns here is we have some absolutely god-awful, horrible rental buildings that need to be gutted and need to be cleaned up and need to be brought up to some sort of code. So if they were to say, hey, we're gonna get in here, we're gonna clean up all 20 units in here, they would, but they're not touching the frame or the structure, just the inside, they're doing it. They would be subject to this bylaw then?
They would be subject to getting a Section 99.1 permit.
So in fact, this bylaw might very well disincentivize property owners from upgrading or doing work on a whole nature that might need to be done, because now of the added regulation and costs incurred upon them, they might be more apt to say, I'm not going anywhere near that because I now have a whole plethora of regulations and bylaws if I want to do this on a comprehensive approach then.
I'm not sure I'd use the word disincentivize, but as I stressed earlier, in terms of these conditions and how they're set for a 99.1 permit, I'd suggest to you that when you look at a building like you just described, one might want to look at what conditions one applies to trying to get that done, because we are trying to still improve the existing rental housing stock in the town, and we are trying to encourage more purpose-built rental housing. But it is a caution. I don't want to run from it. There is a caution that some have said, and particularly I've heard it and seen it in materials I've read about the city of Toronto, that it is discouraging some people from coming forward with purpose-built rental or attempts to improve the rental housing building in sort of the example you put forward, Councillor Mira. So,
well, I would say I have that feeling in my stomach where we haven't consulted with the people who this will absolutely impact. We're doing this in the middle of July. Council chambers are empty, which I don't think they should be for something at this magnitude. I have a lot of concerns about what we're about to do right now, and maybe the lack of engagement with the people who this will impact the most. I mean, we've got dozens of 10 to 20 apartment units in the Bronte area, and these landowners are going to find out when they read the Oakville Beaver next week, look what council just did to us, and nobody asked me. I have a fundamental problem with that moving forward. So I'll leave it there, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will point out that I did a TV show and 2 op-eds in the Oakville Beaver, and we published this. We published articles about this 3 times in the weekly council newsletter. The point that I don't want the solicitors, the point that the solicitor made that I don't think we should overlook here is the amount of the conditions is up to council. The bylaw sets it up so that you have a palette that you can choose from. And if there's a case that meets a call for a light touch, then certainly council can consider it. But there are a lot of apartment buildings in our town, and many of them are old, and the likelihood of renovations or other activities that would impact the tenants is increasing with every year, I would suggest. Councillor McNeice, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Perlin, for this report. Very, very thorough, as other councillors have mentioned. I just want to sort of run by a scenario. So 50 Spears we're familiar with. And, I think they were increasing density on that site, so a set number of units. They were, I think, almost doubling the number of units. But, the challenge I faced and many other councillors was those units that are currently there the tenants that were currently there didn't have the right to return to a similar size unit at a similar rent for a long period of time, because those are our food service workers or healthcare workers, seniors, newcomers, families supporting our schools, churches and things like that. So with the proposed bylaw here, would council have the discretion that I understand Councillor Amero's point that there are some, we still want to have an incentive to fix these buildings and make them high standard. If they were coming forward with an application that proposed higher density rental, but they've worked into their business plan that we know we have to accommodate a set number of tenants to come back, would we be able to approve something like that? Like I'm anticipating that's sort of the new business model, if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, direct answer is yes, in the sense that, so you're suggesting that it's part of this proposal, there will be at least the same number of rental units and those with affordable rents at affordable rents to come. First, the rental supply will be protected in the new for those units and they will be protected for at least 20 years or more, and then the affordable for at least 10 years.
Right. So I mean, my view of it, it's actually going to create an incentive for these owners to build more density on their site of rental units, which is what we want. And they'll have to factor in to their equation that, we've got to replace 50 units for people that were already there. But for them to make the business case, they're going to need to add another 50 units or so. And that would be good quality new units, market rate. So, I mean, in my mind, that's sort of how the new business model works.
I would pass that to Gabe's going to kill me, to the director of planning, because I think that would be more in the director of planning services expertise than mine. I'm just providing the legal framework in terms on which it could happen.
Sure. And so one other thing, so with new purpose-built rentals, I've heard or maybe seen that some developers are coming forward and they're condominiumizing the rental units. So they essentially act as a landlord for the whole building, but they're already condominiumized. And I'm assuming the reason why they do that is so that they could sell, it could almost be a mixed use of rental and condo units. And I'm guessing that would sort of circumvent something like this because it would already be condominiumized. They're just renting out units in a purpose-built rental.
Yeah, it gets a little more complicated than that because when you do take your units together, you do try and place them in the building in groups of at least 6, so that if one then attempts to condominiumize or to change the purpose, rental for these groups that have been protected initially under the Section 99.1 permit, that they can't be just picked off at the end of the frame and a change made. So after a certain period, they can make an application under 99.1 to do so, but again, it has to be a group of 6 or more. So I hope I'm not losing you, but you can set it up in such a way, and the unit does become normally in a condo situation, a condo unit that is then each of the units are then rented out by the condo corporation, but they must remain as rental units. They cannot be sold.
Okay, just one last question. I just have Toronto's policy open here. So my understanding is they're rental replacement requires are that the rent is at a similar rate for a period of 10 years.
That's for the affordable.
Oh, that's affordable. Okay, so so the replacement units, so they would be at a similar rent to what it was before. Is there a period of time?
Plus the RTA guideline
Plus,
increase
yeah.
and subject to the discussion I had with
Correct.
Councillor Chisholm regarding.
Is there a period of time that, or is that just in perpetuity?
Well, because they move in, the RTA takes over.
Okay, so essentially.
So that's your established starting rent, and then the RTA guideline
I see.
would then apply, and of course that applies to that unit until that tenant moves out. For affordable, you have to provide an affordable for somebody moving in, and that depends how many of the existing rental supply were affordable at the time of the application. But for all of the rental supply for whatever period, the returning tenants are protected through the RTA until they leave. Now then, that unit has to stay rental, but it could be at market rent.
Okay. And thanks again for this report. I think it's key to be proactive on this, because we used to see the sort of reno evictions you'd hear about, and you know, we're just maybe starting to see this demo eviction trend. So why not get ahead of it, you know, before we get in more situations like we did with 50 Spears. So thanks again for your report.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Worship. One question about the applicability of the bylaw with respect to units that are built. I mean, it's probably not going to happen, but the units built after 2018, I think it is, are not subject to rent controls. What happens to that calculation that would occur in that particular case to determine a new rent? So if the new rent for a tenant that is being rehoused in a new building is the combination of his existing rent, any particular RTA increases in the interim, plus that construction thing, how would you apply that to an apartment that's not subject to rent control?
Well, they are, well, the agreement, the Section 99.1 permit agreement requires that, and it requires that the RTA apply. But once they're in to an apartment, then the RTA does apply in terms of the guideline increases for each of those units.
But even if the building is built outside of the timeline when rent controls take effect, so that the 99.1 supersedes that guideline.
For the number of rental units 1-to-1. So if you're building in a building of 300, you have 100 units. You're building a building of 300 purpose-built rental. The 100 are subject to the Section 99.1 permit.
Got it.
The other 200 are open to whatever market rate.
Got it. Thank you. Okay. Now, going to the other side of this, what is the jurisprudence around the rights of the landowner or the tenant, or not, sorry, the landlord? He doesn't agree with the decision. What is his appeal rights? Who is he appealing to? What does the law look like in that regard?
Oh, as long as council and or the commissioner, if it's a delegated one, is reasonable in their approach to the conditions they are setting. In other words, it's done in good faith. It's not done with malice. It doesn't ignore some sense of feasibility at all. There is no appeal.
Oh.
So if it's approved by council or approved by the commissioner, there is no appeal from that decision. Of course, the applicant still has the right to say, well, I won't proceed with the project, but right. But that's really their remedy if they're completely dissatisfied with.
So a landlord that is contemplating this doesn't like our decision. He has no right of appeal to any level of court or tribunal whatsoever.
Subject, as I said, to council acting in good faith and reasonably.
That has to be one of the very few things that we have that kind of power over. Yeah. Thank you for that.
The only caveat I will say to you is that you may have noticed that in the most recent amendment that came through, there was an amendment to the Section 99.1 of the Municipal Act that allows the minister to set conditions for what these projects will be, not to the point of providing a right of appeal, but limiting the conditions. And indeed, there is a proposal out there on the environmental registry to establish, the minister is seeking input with respect to conditions. And there are a couple of controversial ones, like not allowing a municipality to set a condition of unit size. Now, Toronto has done that, and Mississauga has that in their intention. That's in this bylaw, but I do have to caution that it's in the list of conditions right now and has been quite common in past projects elsewhere. But that is one of the elements of the proposal that the minister has put forward, as to whether municipalities should be able to require a similar unit size. Similar unit type, yeah, 1-bedroom studio, 2-bedroom, to what the tenant had, but maybe not unit size in terms of gross floor area. Now that's being opposed by Mississauga, by Toronto, but we'll see what happens when the regulation comes out. So not a right of appeal,
Right.
but we could have some limit on what conditions we can set with each application as it comes forward, if the minister puts in that regulation.
Okay, last question is with respect to the determination of what a project is. Obviously, if it's a 6-unit high-rise or a 25-unit high-rise, it applies. What if it is a complex of smaller buildings? So say, for example, a single registered property with five-unit buildings on it. Does the law allow us to take the 25 units that are not necessarily the same building, but are 5 separate buildings in a complex of units on a single property, or how does that work?
It depends on how the owner frames it. So in many of the ones that you'll see, if you look into the Toronto ones, they do involve a number of single buildings and perhaps an old apartment building combined into one project. So if you look at each building, it may only have 2 or 3 rental units, 5 units, but the totality of the application is what's considered. And many of those require related applications, OPAs, ZBAs, site plans, which then opens up the requirement to get a Section 99.1 permit, or as we would call it here in the town. And so the direct answer is, it depends how you frame it. If it's one building and it has only 5, and it's by itself, and they're renovating that building, and has only 5 units, this bylaw would not apply.
But if it's 2 buildings, as you said, if it's 2 buildings with 5 each, if it's the same property and the same owner and the same proposal, that would apply?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Worship.
But again, it depends on how they frame it.
Thank you, Mr. Perlin, that was excellent.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lischina and Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Perlin. I was also thinking about how many units we're talking would be affected. So number of buildings, number of units, and the years that they were built. Because I also worry about potential unintended consequences of not doing anything about them and basically them rotting away. But my other question about an unintended consequence is, could the landlord just decide not to rent the unit and just wait it out for 5-10 years until it's almost empty, or there's 1 or 2, and so we're already losing the ability for anybody to live in those buildings because they're just waiting for it to basically mothball until they can actually do a full new build out. So what would happen in that case? I mean, we can't force anybody to rent their units.
No, that is true on the existing building, but if they decide to demolish or convert that building, then at least the number of rental units in that building, regardless of whether they're occupied or not, would have to be replaced as rental units.
So, but my understanding is, say you have 50 renters in a building.
Right.
And they wait till like only 10 are left of the originals. And so they don't care to have the other 40 rented for the next, whatever, how many years until that building pretty much falls apart. And they go, okay, well, we only have to deal with 10 people now. And so that's what they're willing to do. So we would have an empty building as a result of that, for example, because it would be potentially cheaper for them to just sit and wait on it. Is that a possibility?
I can't really, I don't have the expertise to answer to that question of a possibility. I can only say to you that if they then come forward with a proposal to replace that, to convert it to some other purpose, you could still, under this bylaw, protect the number of rental units. As far as returning, there would only be having the right of return, it would only be the 10.
Oh, no, I understand, but the other 40 haven't been rented for years as a potential because they're waiting to mothball.
Oh, because of this bylaw?
I'm just saying that that potential could be there. So I guess my general question is, based on other municipalities that have enacted this legislation, have we seen any other unintended consequences as a result of that? Thank you.
I'd have to report back to you because what I was trying to find out is how they've approached it. In fairness to you, I did not ask about unintended consequences. The only unintended consequence that was addressed was the whole issue of will it cause some developers to not proceed with a purpose-built rental project for the town by virtue of this bylaw and the conditions that can be set. And that was more in terms of approaching each application in the context of that application and taking into account the objectives that the town is trying to achieve overall with rental housing.
Just a quick, I mean, we know there's a building in Bronte. Well, they're not going to lower their rents. They'd rather sit there empty for who knows how long, but people need housing.
True enough, and that's without any section 99.1 bylaw in existence. Councillor Longo?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Perlin, for a very thorough and great report. I really think with the example of 50 Spears that this is another tool that we can use as a town to help tenants. So I do endorse, I support endorsement of the report and the bylaw. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Longo. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. So thank you for my earlier call with you, Solicitor. I'm caught a little bit here in terms of just, have we thought through how this impacts the overall housing strategy and in terms of ensuring people want to build rental accommodation. And I 100% support that the conditions are going to be either de minimis or significant depending on the context of the changes in terms of number of rental units, et cetera. But I'm not hearing an answer, and maybe Mr. Charles can do this for us, how we're going to also encourage rental so that we've got a bit of an offset here. There's no question we can't have people experiencing what they've experienced in some other jurisdictions where there's no place to go, there's no financial, coverage, and I like the conditions you've put forward, but is there an offset to this from a rental development encouragement?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Interesting question, Councillor. And as Brad had said earlier, the box that we get to play in is we enable, we encourage, we do everything that we can to set the table for the developers and look at or try to achieve rental housing. For a developer, a project that has rental housing and purpose-built rental and condominium, hard costs are pretty much exactly the same. So what are those things in which we can do to incentivize or to encourage the rental? We're limited in that sense. So what you see through this bylaw is that rental stock that we have, we want to preserve that to the absolute extent that we can. And so this helps us move towards that to ensure that we are maintaining the amount of rental that we have. If council is aware, and I think as Brad also pointed out, the region's state of housing report was out, our available rental is incredibly low. It's almost non-existent. So whatever we can do to secure rental and to maintain it, that's definitely an option. Where we have had some thoughts is if we're able to use the MDC, for example, the Municipal Development Corporation, to perhaps look at partnering or joint venturing, or when they go into an agreement with a developer to develop town-owned property, could there be the requirement to have purpose-built rental? Those might be some options. The other thing that we'd point out, and which you'll see in the housing strategy, is having further discussions with the province to allow municipalities to have the tools to require purpose-built rental, whereas right now we just don't have that option.
So I'm not sure if that helps some of my fellow council colleagues, but I appreciate you talking about that limited tenure and trying to put some, maybe we can require that this building be rental if the province would so allow us to. Okay. Mr. Perlin, I also have just a couple areas that I'm not sure if they're going to get cleaned up when you start to refine the information. The relief from the conditions in terms of the new developer is got a timeline they have to hit, and they're off schedule. There's a 60-day provision in there, and yet I'm a tenant and I've moved elsewhere. I'm now going to have the appropriate right to return, but 60 days notice, and is there thought that should be maybe adjusted and in fairness both to the developer as well as the tenant in terms of giving notice?
Yeah, that provision relates to the demolition control area bylaw under the Planning Act, and that provision in the bylaw just mirrors what's already in the Planning Act. So that can't be changed. But when one wants to get an extension on the time frame under a demolition control area bylaw, one has to come to council to get that extension approved. And one can, council in giving an extension can extend that. Also can indicate that before we give the approval of the extension, we do need to adjust the section 99.1 permit conditions and time frame to ensure that, for example, the rent gap payment is continuing beyond the initial time frame, so that you can continue to be in your temporary unit for the longer period of time. There are ways of addressing that. The one downside on a demolition control permit application is that in terms of a time extension and council setting conditions, is appealable to the Ontario Land Tribunal. But again, the section 99.1 permit and agreement are still in effect. And there are mechanisms in the agreements I've seen that address what happens if the landlord, one of which I set out this evening, in terms of doesn't live up to the terms of the agreement. But there is a downside there in terms of that type of extension. But I say to you, the way initially to address it is to set conditions if you ever get an application like that under the demolition control. On the section 91.1 extension, that is in council's hands.
And the councillors will be advised when a demolition application comes forward, because the way it's written is the commissioner will have delegated authority, and only a councillor can request it comes to council, or a commissioner could request that. But is there, I take it as soon as the application comes in, there'll be a notification to the ward councillors?
The guidelines have to be set, and I take note of that, and I certainly will be bringing that to the attention of the commissioner as we develop the guidelines.
Yeah, my only reason for raising it is you can just hear the angst that people have. We want to get it right for the tenant. We also want to make sure that we have conditions that are fair and balanced for others. So that's the only reason I raise it. And I guess my last question.
And I can indicate to you that the application process has followed, for example, in the city and is laid out to be followed in Mississauga. It does provide for an open process with consultation, of course, with council, even on delegated, and with the affected tenants as well.
Thank you for adding that. And my last question is, at any point, is a pro forma looked at from a application? So one of the concerns is we want them to do some renovations. They're needed. In an example, they're obviously going to be able to, on the market rate rental, have increases. But at some point, as you're talking through conditions, are you looking at a pro forma? Because I think, obviously, they're not going to do it if there's not a financial gain for them.
I know there is significant information that's required with the application, including a housing status report related to the existing. I'd have to get back to you on exactly the details. I did not have the opportunity to go through the detailed material for an application. So this evening I can't give you a direct answer, but I can get back to you on that.
So thank you. My general comments on this are that I feel like it needs a little bit more work. But is there a sense of urgency that we have to get this through tonight, or I guess I'm looking left, looking right.
Councillor, I think it's urgent, and I think we've reached the point where people can make a decision.
Okay. I just thought I'd ask because I could sense some.
I would point out that in the matter you were asking about the pro formas, if someone came and was making an economic argument, I would encourage council to ask them to prove what they're saying by producing their pro formas.
Exactly what I would do. Okay, thanks very much, Mayor Burt.
Right. Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, just on that note, again, I just have grave concerns about not consulting the people who this is going to impact. So I think I get a sense of where the room's going to go on this, but I would move referral back to staff until they consult with actual landlords who own these properties and then report back to us after hearing their comments or concerns in September with this report.
Thank you, Councillor, for your motion. I guess what I'll do is I'll ask you to raise your hands if you support referral. Councillor O'Meara, you would want your hand up. 1, 2, and raise your hand if you oppose referral. It's close, but referral fails. I'll put the vote now. Is there any objection to the motion by Councillor McNeice?
And recorded vote, please, Your Worship.
All righty. Madam Clerk, would you record that Councillor O'Meara and Councillor Luschina opposed and the rest of us supported? I could do a roll call, but the hour is late and we have some more agenda to get through. We get to the same result this way, right? We all agree? Okay, good. All right, thank you everybody for that. 7.3 is the notice of intention to demolish 152 Chisholm Street. And the heritage planner is available for questions, but the report is pretty self-explanatory. We have no delegations. I'm going to look for a motion. Councillor Chisholm, thank you. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. Councillor Chisholm's motion carries. Now, we also have a notice of intention to designate 4 properties as listed in the agenda. Again, we have a heritage planner available for questions, but I believe the report is persuasive. If you all agree with me, would someone move this? Councillor O'Meara, thank you. Any objection to Councillor O'Meara's motion? There being none, Councillor O'Meara's motion carries. Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. We now turn to the advisory committee minutes from the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee meeting of June 27th. And the recommendation pertaining to items 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, and .4 of their minutes from its meeting need to be approved, and the remainder of the minutes received. Is there a mover for this? Councillor Chisholm, thank you very much. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there being none, that is carried as well. Would someone oblige us with a motion to rise and report? Councillor Elgar, thank you. Any objection? There being none, Councillor Elgar, your motion carries. Thank you. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3, confidential consent item 5.1, public hearing item 6.1, discussion items 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, and 7.4, and advisory committee minutes 9.1, as noted by the clerk. We need a mover and seconder for the report. Councillor Shi, thank you, and Councillor Knoll, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there being none, the motion by Councillors Shi and Knoll is carried. Council, is there any new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature? Councillor O'Meara.
Just to wish Councillor Adams a belated happy birthday the other day. Doesn't look a day older every year.
Yeah, are we going to sing? Congratulations, Councillor Adams, on another successful orbit around the sun. Can we have a mover and seconder for consideration reading of the bylaws, please? Councillor Lischina and Councillor Haslett-Deal, thank you. Is there any objection? Madam Clerk, there being none, the bylaws are read, considered, and passed. And that brings us to the end of the meeting. Thank you, everybody. It's been terrific working with you, and you did a great deal of work tonight, and I think this was a big night. And that ends the meeting.